What's up, guys? Part 5 of the Nimbus 550 build series video. At the end of the last episode, we got our tail rotor done and our tail boom all put together. So from here, it's time to merge that with the main frame of the helicopter. We'll get our tail pushrod in, get our tail servo all double checked out, make sure everything's moving and working smoothly, and start to have ourselves something that looks like a complete helicopter that's ready for the final installation of the motor and electronics. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and dig into it. Ourselves a working tail rotor. So now, could you imagine doing all of this, right, with this tail boom sticking out? So now we can go ahead and get our tail boom on and get that bolted on, and then go from there. The next thing we need to do is get the tail belt in our tail boom. Now it's easy to tell which end is which, because the end with the two holes on each side is obviously the end that goes towards our tail case. Use the lettering to make sure you get it the right way up in conjunction with the tail fin. Now, I usually try, and I don't worry too much with these bigger booms about getting the belt perfectly straight, but you kind of do it with some force. So wrap the push rod with some friction against the end of the push rod, pull it taut, just like so, and then use it to push it through the push rod belt. And then, there we go. So now, pull the push rod out of there, we've got our tail belt through, and we can line it up such that our lettering and tail fin makes sense. And then we're going to take those 4 bolts from before and get a little bit of blue Loctite on them and just go ahead and sink those in. So let's go ahead and do that now. Don't go crazy over tightening these, just snug them up and then just a tiny bit more of a turn and call it good. And by the way, if visibility is something you're concerned about, by all means take this tail fin off and spray paint it. Right? Nothing says you can't put stickers on it or spray paint it or do whatever you want. Customize it. Figure out what canopy you want to run. If you're gonna, I guess there aren't a lot of options for the Nimbus yet. The V2 certainly has a lot of options for it, so I feel like canopy options for the Nimbus are probably coming. But that's a guess. But you know, see if you can find spray paint the same yellow as the yellow in the canopy and paint the fin that. If that'll help you see it better. Alright, last but not least, I want to sight down the boom and get my tail belt with no twist in it. The nice thing about these big booms is you can literally just let a little daylight in one end and you can see. So I know that this tail boom is correct. Right now it has no twist in it. I'm going to figure out the twist in just a minute. So now I can set this aside and tuck it right over there. Okay, so the first step in the process to merging our tail boom and our main frame is actually to look at what's called the main gear assembly and the tail pulley, which is the smaller gear underneath it. Now, I've actually gone ahead and loosened these 4 screws that are into the top of the main gear already, so we're going to pop this out. Now, whenever I work on main gear assemblies with auto rotation hubs and one-way bearings and whatnot, I always make sure, just in case it matters, and it usually does, I keep everything upright so that I always know that this is the way it goes and don't flip the gear over on the table. And I've already taken this apart, so I've cleaned all those 4 screws, and then what you have left is this tail pulley and our one-way bearing hub. So I'm actually going to pull this hub out. It's just a friction fit. And then again, I'm going to keep this upright as well, but you can see there's a bearing here on the bottom, here, and this is firmly attached to this hub, but the manual does call for a little bit of bearing retaining compound or green Loctite on the outside of this bearing. We're going to use just a tiny amount and then pop it right back into our tail pulley. So let's go ahead and do that now. Again, I'm going to grab my awl, take just a tiny bit of green Loctite here, don't need much at all, and just smooth some around in here. This is definitely not going to come out. You just want to increase this bond a bit, and then just to press it back in. Alright, so that is good to go there. The other thing we want to do now is lubricate the one-way bearing. So what a one-way bearing does is when we apply power to, from the motor in the helicopter, right, that causes the main gear to spin in the correct direction. and then that also adds rotation to the tail pulley so that the tail rotor spins, and so the helicopter, can stay stable, right? If the tail rotor stops spinning, the whole helicopter, the tail boom whips around, wildly. But if you want to do an auto rotation or a baby auto landing where you just kill the motor power a few feet off the ground and kind of glide the helicopter to the ground, what you need to be able to do is shut the motor off, but still allow the main shaft to spin freely, and for the main shaft rotation to continue to drive the tail rotor, right? So in an auto rotation, we take the helicopter up to, a couple hundred feet, and then we cut the motor off, and we actually use the downward force, the weight of the helicopter, and then we give it a little bit of forward momentum, and we can actually use that to keep the tail blade spinning. And full-scale helicopters can do this as well, and safely land when their engines die. Keeps the main rotor spinning. We do a little flare at the end to put some energy back in the rotor and set it down. But if it was a rigid system, as soon as the motor died, the blades would literally stop turning, right? So this one-way bearing says when the motor gives force, add the force and transfer it. When the motor stops giving force, allow the shaft to spin freely. So we want to add some lubrication in here. The manual, may or may not call for grease. They often do. And here's another area of debate in the hobby, right? Some folks say that you need to use a very specific one-way bearing grease. SAB makes one, for example. Some say you should use Tri-Flow liquid lubricant, which is what I use. It's called Tri-Flow Superior Lubricant. Available everywhere, Amazon, home improvement stores, etc. With a one-way bearing, I prefer to use Tri-Flow and nothing else. The problem with using the same grease we used inside the tail rotor and the main head of the helicopter, for example, is if we get dirt and debris inside the one-way, the grease makes it stick a little better, and then eventually you get enough dirt and just dust and whatever, especially if you're in a drier climate with a lot of dust in the air. And it gums up the works of the one-way, and it stops working, the one-way fails, and you have to replace it. So I just prefer to use a liquid lubricant, and the way I'll do this is actually 2 one-way bearings stacked in here. Unsure of the reasoning from XL behind that, but I'm sure it's a good one. And so I'll just put a few drops kind of around, and I'll do this in the top bearing. And then I'll do it in the bottom one as well. Not going crazy here, just putting maybe 5 drops in each bearing. And then I'm actually going to find the main shaft. So inside this main shaft package, and I'll show you this in just a second here, is a little metal pin. You do not want to lose that pin. Let me get it out of the bag here. So see this little pin? Don't lose that. Keep that somewhere safe. And then this is our main shaft. And what I'm going to do is just literally slide it into our one-way here and just work it around. So you can see that I'm actually going to hold this captive here, right? I can spin this in one direction, but not in the other without spinning the gear, right? So it's cool the way this works. So I'm just going to kind of spin it one way, and another, work it up and down, kind of help it move that oil around in there. Take that, take our main shaft and just set it down out of the way. We can now replace our main gear onto this assembly here. So I'm going to take these 4 bolts out of the top of the main gear and then orient it back on top. And then we're going to use some Loctite in each of these, which you really only need on the tip here. The rest is just passing through the main gear. And I'm going to keep these very loose until I have all 4 in position. Alright, so that's our last bolts. We can go ahead and start actually adding a little bit of force to these. Not a lot, just a tiny bit. And tighten opposite each other. There we go. There is our main gear assembly. Wipe up the oil that dripped out of there. Keep it on a paper towel. Okay. So, next steps from there. Okay, so let's take a look at the manual here for a second. So look up here where it says bag 10, and then it gives this model number, XL55V2K02. What they don't do a good job of calling out in the manual is that what this means is this V2K02 is the full-size servo version of the Nimbus. That's not the size we're building. Remember, we're working on the mini servo version. So this right here, one of the features of the full-size version is this extra bearing block that goes, down here under your main gear. We don't have that on the mini servo version, so we're going to skip these 2 pages, come to page 38, where it says V2K01. This is the mini servo version. Why they don't type that somewhere on this page, I don't know, but this is what we're working with. So we are going to slide this main gear assembly in. And then we have a pin, and I'm going to talk about how all this works. So we slide the gear in, we drop the main shaft through this main shaft collar. Let me zoom in here for you. So we'll drop the main shaft through the main shaft collar into our top bearing, slide the main gear in, slide the shaft through the main gear and beyond, and then we have this little pin that's going to go in. See this little hole at the base of the main shaft? That pin's going to go through that. And then that pin is actually going to sit in our tail pulley. There's a slot for it, and I'll show you that in just a second. And then also in the mix during all of the steps, we have to take our tail boom with the belt on it and then capture that around the tail pulley at the same time. So really, first step is slide the boom in, loosen the tail pulley. All right, so we get that step done. Then we slide the main gear in, get the belt around the tail pulley and leave it kind of hanging out. And then we drop our main shaft through this main shaft collar, through the main gear, pick up the pin, and then we're going to pull up on the main shaft, tighten this collar down against this bearing. It's all going to make perfect sense when you see me do it. You can see here, pull up main shaft, pull down main shaft collar, and tighten all the bolts. You can see here we need to check the rotation of the tail belt. So we're actually going to have to twist the belt such that when the main rotor here turns clockwise, the tail belt turns counterclockwise, and I'll show you how we do that in just a second. Okay, let's cover a couple little basics here, and then we'll get into it. So in the case of the main shaft, it's got a hole almost at the end of the shaft on one end and a hole about 1/4 inch from the end on the other side. The end with the hole right against the top is where the main rotor will go. So this is the top of the main shaft. The end with the hole almost 1/4 inch up, that's the bottom here. So in the bag with the main shaft was this little metal pin, and what that does is if you look at the base of the main gear here, you can see this channel right here, and this guy right here is where this pin is going to fit into. So let me show you outside of the helicopter. So I'm just going to take the main shaft and put the pin across it here, slide it through our main gear, and then I'm going to align the pin here such that it can push there. Alright, so now if you look here, that pin is in that channel on the bottom of the tail pulley, and when we pull this main shaft up and tighten the collar down against here, that pin will stay captured, and it's what keeps the tail rotor spinning with the main shaft. So for now, I'm going to take this back apart, now that you've seen that, because it's going to be probably pretty tricky to see when we actually get this going. And the next step from here is going to be to grab our tail boom and tail belt and then go from there. Now, since our tail pulley rotates with the main shaft, when the main shaft rotates clockwise, right, the tail pulley will rotate clockwise. So if you pick up our tail boom, and right now the belt is still in alignment with no twists. In order to get this to spin counterclockwise while spinning clockwise in this direction, right, you have to rotate the belt to the, you rotate it in a counterclockwise direction, right? So, which is kind of to the left. But anyway, you can see now that if I rotate this in a clockwise direction, right, just rotating the belt as if it were attached to the gear, my tail rotor spins in a counterclockwise orientation, which is what we're after. So, we're going to keep this kind of sideways now with our tail fin pointing straight down, and then we're going to thread this boom through our boom clamps. We're just going to push the tail pulley, and then we may have to kind of get some fingers in here to keep it, to get it through the idler pulleys. That's a little tricky. Oh, it just went on its own. That was nice and easy. And then, oops, knocking everything over on the workbench here, and then we're going to slide this tail boom into the first clamp. Again, you've got that little tiny pinch bolt that might be giving you some friction. You might have to back that out a little. There it goes. Now it's sliding in. And then we're headed into the second boom clamp now. It gets a little tighter. And there we go. We're actually going to push it all the way until it makes contact with those idler pulleys and we can't push it in anymore. So now, if I cut to the overhead, you can see I've got the tail belt kind of sticking out here. And you spin it sideways here. So here's our tail belt. And the next step now is to get our main gear in with this belt wrapped around the tail pulley. So I'm going to take a second here and reposition things so I can show you this a little better on camera. Okay, we're going to try it this way. So we're going to take our main gear here with our tail pulley on the bottom, and we're going to sort of try and work the belt around it as we sort of push it into the main frame here. And I know my fingers are all up and in the way here. But there we go. Alright, so now you can see I've gotten the belt now is around our tail gear as I slide the main gear just loosely kind of hanging out in here. Alright, now for the fun part. We take our main shaft, right? Again, with the end, with the hole about 1/4 inch from the end, and it's going to go into our main pulleys, and then, I don't know if you can see in here, not so much. How much do I need to spin this up for you to see? But now I have to get this aligned such that our main gear, whoops, get back in there. Alright, so now, okay, we can breathe a sigh of relief. I've gotten the main shaft through the main gear and beyond. It's actually, you can see here, kind of sticking out under here. And so now what I need to do is get that pin, that metal pin, installed in the bottom and put some tension on this. So it's actually not that hard to reach in here. Let me get this in and show it to you. Okay, so now I've added the pin. You can see it running across the bottom of the main shaft there. So now I'm going to tilt this so I can see for a second and align things, and I'm going to pull it back. So now you can see that pin is now seated in the bottom of the tail pulley such that when I rotate the main shaft, it is captured there. And I'm just going to check with my awl that it's centered. Yep, there's a gap there. It's completely in. So I'm going to just set this here. So if we let go of the main shaft, that pin has got enough friction that it's staying in position. The whole thing will kind of gently lower and we can catch our breath. So now we need to grab what's called the main shaft collar, which is this piece right here. And the main shaft collar has a couple of different bolts in it. It's got a larger bolt that sort of pinches this gap closed against the shaft, and then there's actually a set screw that'll bite into the main shaft here. And what you want to do is pull that set screw out all together, and then I just run blue Loctite on this set screw because, again, we've got 2 bolts on the main shaft collar. So I take that set screw and I prep it with blue Loctite and leave it just sitting on a driver. And I actually have a couple of 2mm drivers. So I'm going to take the other driver, pop this other screw out, and get Loctite on it. And then you can actually go ahead and get that screw started. So we're just going to get that kind of going here without really tightening it much, just sort of snug it to the point it would start to tighten. Alright, so now we can drop this on top. It doesn't look like there is an up or down of the main shaft collar. It's pretty symmetrical. So we'll just slide this right over the main shaft. Okay, so now I'm going to cut to the front camera for this. So our objective now is to pull up on the main shaft, push down on this collar here, and then tighten it down. And what that's going to do is, right now you can see the main gear has got slop in it, right? It's allowed to move up and down. But if I pull this up here and then take this ring, push it down and tighten it, now there's nothing between that pin capturing the gear on the bottom and this collar pushing down from the top. That'll take all the slop out of our main shaft. So that's our goal for this step here. So I'm going to go ahead and get a driver right on that first bolt here. And then as I get ready to start tightening, going to... Now, some of you will have your main rotor head sitting right on top here. This is one of the reasons I don't put mine in right away, is it's just easier to work on steps like this. Alright, so I'm going to kind of stand up. I've got a lot of force pushing down. I want zero slop in here, so I want this nice and tight. Don't over tighten this bolt. I have, on 2 occasions, had to remove that bolt with a special drill bit and other things because I've over tightened them because I get overzealous and excited. Alright, so we already put blue Loctite on this little set screw, so now we're going to take that, and this guy we can put a decent amount of force on. But you know what I'm going to do? Real quick, before I do that, I'm just going to test this one more time. I'm going to turn the main shaft clockwise, and our tail rotor is in fact going counterclockwise. I'll show you in just a minute as well, but I just wanted to confirm that that was the case. Alright, so driving this set screw in with a decent amount of force. Alright, so now, when you finish that step, if you move this up and down and you hear tink, 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 like, you know, this is allowing you to have some slop in the main gear, or you can physically move the main gear up and down. You didn't do it tight enough, right? So you need to go back and do it. So now, flip this over, make sure that that pin is still sitting correctly inside your tail pulley. If it's not, bad things will happen, so make sure that's good. And then the next thing we need to do from here is set our tail belt tension, right? And also the angle of our tail fin, because right now it's not perfectly straight and it can rotate either way. So we need to first set our tension, and then secondly, double check and make sure we have this thing in alignment, and then we're going to tighten the bolts on our tail boom clamps that will lock all of these positions in. So I'm going to go ahead and get set up for that, and we'll go from there. Okay, so installing the tail boom now, right? We got our tail belt wrapped nicely around our tail pulley, but it's way too slack at this point. So the first thing we need to do is remove the bolts, and I'll see if I can show these to you without hitting the camera with the tail boom, that are in our tail boom clamps at the top. And they're these bolts here and here. And we need to remove these and get some Loctite on them, right? Because these will be what holds the tension on our tail boom. And then this little pinch bolt here, which will actually, once we're super happy with the way the boom is tensioned and how vertical the tail fin is, and how everything is aligned, that the tail rotor needs to be at 90 degrees to the main rotor, and we'll check all of that alignment. We'll tighten all these down, but we need to pull them, remove them, get some Loctite on them, reinstall them loosely, and then we'll work on adding the tension and tightening them. So I'm going to go ahead and take those out and get Loctite on those, and then we'll come back. Okay, so I've gone ahead and taken all of the bolts out of our boom clamps and gotten Loctite on those and reinstalled them loosely, including the bolt that will eventually pierce the boom once we're happy with the way everything's laid out. I've gone ahead and just loosely pulled some quick tension here, just to get the tail belt loosely tensioned, and then I've gotten out a few different options. So the goal of this step is to get some tension on the tail belt. We'll talk about that in just a second. Get the tail fin vertical, right? So we're not, the tail boom isn't completely twisted, completely, off kilter like that, such that our tail rotor is 90 degrees to the main rotor. And then tighten all these bolts so that it stays taut, obviously. Now there's a few different methods to square things up. Because of the way on this helicopter the tail fin is attached to the tail case, you could actually, assuming you're working on a flat and level bench, which I am, actually just use a framing square and square up the fin that way. It may not be perfect, but it'll get you very close. Ideally, you want to do that across the tail box if there were a flat edge on it versus the tail fin. So there actually is a little bit of a flat edge on one side. My favorite method to set is I actually have a digital pitch gauge. This is the RC logger unit, which unfortunately I don't think are made anymore or available, but you can actually take the central unit out, and I can actually square it up to the side of my frame or the top of my frame, and then set this directly on the tail case. Now in the case of this particular helicopter, it's a rounded top to the tail case, so I actually would have to go set my 0 on the side of the frame, and then use that to double check it. And so that's what I'm going to use. I'm going to zero this on the side of the frame or whatever, but a square will work. And honestly, you can get a pretty decent helicopter out of just giving it the old hairy eyeballs, just sighting down the boom, making sure that fin looks vertical and parallel to the side frames of the helicopter. That's very important. So don't just look at the fin, make sure the fin looks like it's following the exact same vertical path of the side frame of the helicopter. Now, tail belt tension. I think if you ask 10 different people up and down the flight line how they set their tail belt tension, you're going to get 10 different answers. The important thing is that it's not so slack that when you spin the main rotor, you can actually hear the teeth of the tail belt coming in contact with each other inside the boom. That's bad. It can lead to it skipping teeth on the tail pulley. So you do need some tension of it. Honestly, I don't like to run a crazy tight tail belt. There are guys that will literally put their feet up against the back of the skids of the helicopter, pull as hard as they can, and then get whoever else lives in the house with them to bring a driver over and tighten the heck out of it. They want to be able to go ting and hit the belt and hear a musical note come out. I prefer a much looser tail belt tension. I think I get better auto rotations that way. It just creates less drag in the drivetrain, meaning forces that slow down the rotor head when I'm trying to do an auto. If the Nimbus 550 auto rotates as well as the XL 550 does, I'll be very happy. That thing autoed almost like a 700. So with all that rambling out of the way, let's get to it. So the first thing I'm going to do is just have a quick go at it. So I'm going to just put some tension on it, and then get my tail fin loosely square, bring my pitch gauge here over, which I've already zeroed to the side of the frame, and see which direction I need to go. Check it again. This way. So from a vertical tail fin standpoint, this is dead on right now, but do I have the tail belt tension I want? Now, there's actually a good amount of friction. I got lucky. You can kind of tighten and loosen these bolts on the boom clamps to create enough friction where, unless you're pulling crazy tail belt tension, it's not going to be pulled back in by the tail belt. So right now this tail belt feels pretty good. Could be maybe a tiny bit tighter, so I'm actually going to put a driver on the bolt, snug it up here, and then I'm going to put just a tiny bit of tension on here. I'm going to try not to rotate it at all, and I'm going to start tightening this first boom clamp. Don't go crazy over tightening, and be careful when you tighten. Depending on the way your finger's positioned, you can actually get pinched in between the two ends of the boom clamp as it tightens. Alright, so now I got one bolt tightened. I'm just going to use my finger to kind of poke around at the tail belt. I'm going to spin it, make sure I don't hear anything nasty going on. That sounds fine. And so I'm going to go ahead and tighten this other one in the front. Alright, that feels good. Now, I'm going to then double check here. I'm going to go against the side of my frame here. 0, 0, 0, 0, and against the side of the tail case. I think I can get it closer. So, I'm going to go ahead and loosen this just a little bit. Needs to go this way just a hair. That is looking great. Let's feel what our tail belt tension feels like. That still feels good. Could be a little tighter. So again, I'm going to get my driver in position and ready to tighten, and then just put a little bit of tension there. Tighten that guy up. Okay. And then follow up by tightening up the other one, and then we'll check it again. I think I like it. Now, normally I would just flat out trust the pitch gauge, but the problem is that there's so little vertical surface on the tail case to put it up against that there's a lot of sort of variable for error in there. So, now we're going to take this last screw, and I'll show you where it is here in just a second. It is in the middle of the rearward boom clamp, assuming you put the correct boom clamp there. And if you didn't, shame on you, because I told you in that video. And then we're actually going to tighten this to the point it pierces the boom. And this now means that this boom is not going to slide at all. And it also helps ground static electricity. So that boom rotating the belt rotating inside the boom can create some static buildup. And basically connecting that screw, because carbon also can be conductive as well, driving that screw from the boom clamp into here basically makes a giant electrical connection all through the helicopter, grounds the whole thing, so that it's less prone to interference. And with that, the only thing left to do is put our tail push rod on. So now the things to check here are on our tail servo pointing down at 90 degrees. So we're going to look at our ball links here, and just like before, there's a number on the outside of these that tells you that's the outside. The side without the number goes into the servo ball. And this particular push rod is going to be a little tricky to get on there. Let's see how easy it is to get some ball link pliers. We can kind of pull it out towards us a little. Yep. There we go. So step one. Okay, moving this way. Step two, and there's a little bit of a picture of this in the manual. So looking at the manual here, you can see that basically when our rudder servo, or tail servo rather, is centered, that this bell crank should be at 90 degrees to the tail shaft. So we're going to want to go ahead and get that set correctly, and we'll do that by adjusting these ball links on the end. So by adjusting the tension here, we can set this. But the first thing I want to do is figure out where the numbers are on this guy. And I'm going to gently hold the push rod as I twist this out. So I've got the number on the top here. I'm going to get my rudder servo at 90 degrees. So I'm just going to eyeball it there, and then I'm going to get this here, and it's obvious just by setting this on top, I haven't connected it yet, that obviously you can see that bell crank where these two bolts are here, whoops, down here, is not, when I rest this servo on top of the servo, the ball here, it's not at 90 degrees. So I need to increase the length of my push rod a fair amount. So I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do it on just one ball link, but we're going to try and make sure there's enough thread. But I think actually, let's first do it on this one. See if we can unscrew a few threads from that end. There we go. And then let's look at it. That's much better. And then we're going to hold this guy in position here now. And give a couple turns. We're just going to keep checking it every couple turns. That's getting very close. I think maybe one more turn will get us there. Let's see. I think that's close enough now that what we can do is actually put it on the link, because sometimes when it's not on there for real, it's not quite exactly where it'll go, and let's see where it goes. So let's see, the servo is pointing straight down at 90. We're very close to. How are we doing on the... Looks like we're doing really well. So the 90 degrees we want is between, these two bolt heads right here and the tail shaft running here. So you can see that let me get it set here. So perfect 90 degrees to the eyeball. Looks like it's right about there. And then if I look at my servo's sticking down at 90 degrees. So that's perfect. So our tail push rod is good. So now, let's take a minute, now that we have the push rod attached. So grab down by where the servo is, on this end, and just move the tail. Is it easy? I mean, obviously you feel the friction of the servo now. But you can actually even pop the push rod off of the servo and move it back and forth. Is it easy to operate the tail? Or is your tail servo going to be struggling? Right, and this is super easy to move. Now we've got to take this pushrod guide, this little plastic piece here, and these are always fun to put on because they're sort of become spring-loaded. So you clamp it together on the pushrod, and then we'll tighten this little bolt and nut through it. The nut will be captured on, you can see there's like a little captured nut side that'll stop it from spinning, and then the bolt will go through the other side. And in the manual, they don't give you any specific guidance really as to where it goes, other than roughly about halfway, a little bit closer to the tail. So I'm going to grab the nut for that and this little bolt. Again, this is a plastic lock nut, so no need for Loctite there. So the way I do this is I get my driver in the bolt, and then where'd that little nut go? There it is. Pull this around and get it through the hole. Alright, now I need to try and get this nut on as best I can. Alright, once it starts to grab, you can relax, and then we can sort of guesstimate where we think we want this. The other thing to do is move the pushrod back and forth as you start to tighten it, and it'll help you position this thing, feel where it wants to be. So again, keep moving your tail pushrod. Make sure the guide is not causing friction anywhere it shouldn't, and then go ahead and tighten it until it's secure on the boom. And yeah, shouldn't be binding the pushrod or causing any friction. Should be able to run straight through. So you can see, when you see the whole length of the boom here, whereabouts I put mine, about halfway through, and seems to work well. So now we've got ourselves a decent amount of helicopter. So next steps from here, we're going to take the battery tray and slap that together real quick, and then we're probably going to call it a day there. Battery tray, let's talk about that first real quick. Super simple. So this is your battery tray, fairly straightforward, and this is the battery tray puller that just lets you take the thing in and out, especially if you're loading it from the rear. And where this circle is on the back, you'll see there's two chamfered holes and two little chamfered bolts. This little puller just mounts like so. So we'll go ahead and get some Loctite on these guys. Okay, so you can see here, there's our battery tray with the puller attached. So you may see in the manual some parts revolving around the battery tray and installing some connectors on it. There's an optional accessory kit you can get where you can actually slide the battery tray. It's got two electrical connections on the front you have to purchase additionally and then connect to your battery. And you can actually have this rigged so that you just slide this battery right in from the back of the canopy and it just powers up the whole helicopter. But most of us, including me, are probably not going to do that. Alright, I'm going to grab the battery and I'll show you how that will attach to the tray. Okay, so in the kit, XL Power includes some Velcro for your battery, and both flavors, so you can one side for the battery, one side for the tray, and then these sort of thin, self-sticking Velcro straps for your battery. For batteries, I'm going to be running the Pulse 4500 milliamp 6S packs. Big fan of the Pulse packs. Depending on how you've set up your Nimbus, I know there are a lot of guys doing 6, 7, and 8S setups. For most, I think, entry-level beginners, certainly on a budget build, the Pulse 4500 milliamp or, a 6S battery is a great place to start. The chargers that charge 6S are generally less expensive, easier to get your hands on. 6S packs are less expensive than 7 and 8S packs, and it's just a great beginner point. And then eventually, when you get to 700s, if you decide to, you can pair up two 6S packs to make 12S packs, so they're great investments as well. All right, that said, how does this attach? So the front of the battery tray is the side opposite the puller. For now, we're going to work on just temporarily attaching the battery. So I'm going to take the Velcro piece here and put it probably towards the front of the battery tray is where I suspect we'll end up installing these packs. But again, until we set the center of gravity, I'm not entirely sure. We're just going to loosely set that there. And then I'm going to take my battery straps. So put the logos over the outside. So you just pick whatever straps. So it just simply folds over, pull it taut, come over the top, and then fold it down like that. So you've just got a strap here, and then we're going to do another strap on the front as well. Nicely. Okay, so now we've got these two Velcro straps holding our pack down. There's also Velcro on the back side of the battery and on the tray itself. we're going to go ahead and slide this into the body of the helicopter. In the case of the Nimbus, you can do it from the front or the back. I'm going to do it from the front, because that's just how I load all of mine. And then you're going to listen for a click, and you'll actually see this little battery piece pop as we get the tray in far enough. So now listen for the click, and you can watch it as the tray slides in and engages. There you go, you just saw it there. And then every time you put your pack in, just give it a quick wiggle. Make sure that that pin has in fact engaged. Alright, so now that we've got our battery tray kind of slapped together, that's in preparation to be able to power the helicopter when we install our electronics. So that's going to be the next step. So in the next episode, we'll go ahead and install our motor into the frame, and then we'll start working on wiring up our electronics. And then the very next step we'll do is to install our swash plate, and that is going to ride on the main shaft, just like so, with our alignment pin in the alignment guide, with our links going from our servos to the swash. And you know what? We could go ahead and do that right now in preparation for wiring it up. So why not? Let's throw that onto this episode. So we're going to grab our drive links from before. We want to find the 3 that are the same height, and not the 2 with the turnbuckles. So not these 2 with turnbuckles. We want the 3 that are the exact same height. We're going to take our swash plate, slide it down the main shaft, put the alignment pin in here, and now it's just a matter of connecting these links from the servo ball on the servo arm here to the link on the swash plate. And you can see instantly that there are 3 we need to get. The rearward one is the one we want to do first. The side with the number faces away from the ball. So the side without the number goes into the ball. So I'm just going to get these set, and then we'll click these on. I'm just checking to make sure that the numbers are both on the same size on the links, and if for any reason they aren't, that I rectify that. It looks like these are all good. Okay, so I'm going to grab our handy dandy balling pliers, and I'll show you this from a couple different angles. We'll start from above, and actually let's start from laying down. It's probably going to be the best angle you get at this. So again, I take the side with the number, and the number is written about here on the base of the ball link, and we'll attach it to the servo side first. We'll put it on the ball, get our ball link pliers here, get that popped on right there, and then we take our swash plate and pop it on there as well. Okay, so that's our first link. Let's go ahead and do our elevator servo link. I probably should have started there, or our rearward most cyclic link. And let's do the servo half first, because that's a little funky to reach. And get that there. So normally you would just do this upright. Obviously I'm just trying to let you guys have somewhat of a view of what I'm doing here. And again, if for any reason it's not going on, don't force it. Pause. Take a minute to figure out what's going on. Make sure you got the link going around the right way. And then double check it. There it goes. So this one we're going to kind of temporarily slide it over the alignment pin. And then we got to kind of work it into position. Slide. You can kind of bend this bracket around just a little bit. Don't put a ton of force on it. And then we're going to pop it onto the ball. Like right now this is just sliding back and forth. We actually have to get it to rigidly link onto the ball here. There it goes. So now that's permanently attached, and then I'll show you this one from the front. Okay, only one more link left to go. So again, let's look for where our numbers are. They're really hard to see. You gotta kind of keep them in the lights. So servo ball side first, and then swash plate. Boom. Okay, there we go. You can see now that we have our mainframe with our swash plate on it at this point, and our control links ready to go. And this is where we're going to start with to install the motor and the electronics, and then we'll level this swash plate, get that dead level before we add the rotor head on top And then we'll pretty much be ready to maiden. So just the electronics to go. So motor, FBL, servos are already installed as well, and our ESC install and programming. And we're getting very close to a finished helicopter. So with that, I'm Nick Wisdom. This is Hack TV. Thanks for watching. Look for the next episode soon. Thanks a lot.